Thanks, yay. Hi, my name is Joe Grand. Thank you for coming. This is my Life of Badges presentation. Does anybody recognize this graphic? Yes, okay. So when I first had to make a title for this, I'm like, what should I call it? I don't know, like lessons of badges. Like, it was kind of boring. And it was like the middle of the night. I woke up and I texted Helen. I'm like, Joe Grand's Life of Badges. I didn't know that it actually was a movie, right? So Monty Python's Life of Brian. And there is Life of Pi. So I apologize for having to use AI. When I showed this to my kids, they're like, Daddy, you can't use AI for that. That's so lame. But I did anyway, so I think it's kind of cute. Okay, so I basically have 20 minutes to talk about sort of my experiences with badge manufacturing. There are so many stories. I spent all day looking through years and years of slides to kind of in pictures to figure out like what's worth talking about. So I'm barely scratching the surface of all of them, but hopefully you'll be able to get some ideas of at least the suffering I went through so you don't have to suffer through it. Whether you're doing badges or whether you're like taking some of these ideas and doing it on a product or whatever else you're doing, right? So it's not specific to like volume manufacturing. So it's basically gonna try to be like 2 minutes per badge, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A, which is always fun. So electronic badges, this is, as far as we know, this is where it started. So this was a badge that I designed for some hardware hacking training that I was giving at Black Hat back in 2005. And as some of you may or may not know, Jeff Moss, the Dark Tangent, who started Black Hat, or started Defcon, started Black Hat. And you know, it was like Defcon, the hacker conference, Black Hat, like the corporate conference. So I'd started doing trainings very early for him and made this board that was like a pick with some other stuff on it, and basically that's how you learned about identifying components and modifying the circuit board and monitoring signals, and there's a security mechanism on there. And unbeknownst to me, I'm still doing this as basically my career of like teaching hardware hacking with a modified version of this board, kind of incorporating some of the things I've learned throughout the years of doing the badges. But I had done this, and Jeff said, hey, we should do something like that for DEF CON. And that was like the catalyst of like, ooh, let's do an electronic badge. And it was the beginning of something nobody expected, right? But as like the tools got better, the resources got better, we started seeing more and more non-conference badges, and now we have Badge Life, so it's pretty cool. This was the first badge, DEF CON 14, which was 2006. So think about 2006, 20 years ago, just about, like access to development tools, just anything, right? Resources, everything was way harder. And we really just wanted to do something that we could say, hey, let's try to expose the community to electronics. Because at the time, hacking was still very like network, and I think Wireshark was, you know, that was the thing. Everyone's monitoring Wi-Fi. And a lot of software focus. So we're like, let's do something hardware, but something simple, so it's not gonna like scare people away. And we also didn't know what we were getting into. So we figured, let's just try. So these are some of my initial notes. We just wanted to have something that we could include everybody in, whether or not they wanted to mess with electronics, because it turns out of thousands of people, not every person that's wearing your thing wants to use your thing. Like they want to do lockpicking, they want to do something else. So we wanted something that wasn't intrusive, but something that could still be fun for people who wanted it. And that was sort of a mantra that we carried through all of the designs of not over-engineering, because it's very easy to over-engineer, right? And think, oh, I should do this, 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 and then you get stuck, which almost happened at the last one, which I'll talk about. So yeah, we made 6,000 of these, which at the end I have sort of a little table of like cost and quantity. And I had done some production manufacturing before, but not in this way. Like it was for large companies that were doing stuff. So this was like almost hobbyist level with high volume. The hardest part about this particular project was the part sourcing, and I hadn't really done my own high volume sourcing before. And I'm looking at my notes because I had so many different badges I have to remember which is which. But basically I used a very large electronics distributor, I'm not gonna mention which one, and because they tended to have better pricing than some of the smaller distributors at the time, and had a relationship with them through some of my professional engineering work. So I was like, oh, okay, we'll just order 6,000 of everything. Or in the case of like the LEDs that we needed 12,000. Basically, lots of issues ensued. Misquoted lead times, lost parts, slow shipping, things that we didn't necessarily anticipate, which after that was sort of the beginning to know. And basically, I pressured the people at this distributor to say, hey, I need somebody competent that's not going to lose the order, that's not going to lose the parts. Basically blaming, Defcon or pushing Defcon on them of like, we have thousands of people waiting for this to come. We cannot mess up. Like the deadline is not going to be changed. So I got upgraded to like apparently somebody more competent, which was interesting because I've had a bunch of times doing badge design and other engineering where you get assigned to like an outside salesperson and they don't even want to come to your house because you're ordering, 100 pieces instead of they would rather sell 100,000 pieces or whatever. So I've actually had people admit, I don't even want to go to you. I just want to go to another customer. He then got pushed aside and got somebody else. But it is a typical thing, right? So if you're dealing with smaller amounts, it's kind of harder to compete with the larger customers. So these were the badges. And it was really the first time that we had tried different types of solder mask colors. I was using green on my circuit board at the time. And I just reached out to the fab that I was dealing with, which is eTechnet, which I use for a lot of things as well. And was like, what solder mask colors can you do? And they had some like, standard ones that we'd think of now, of white and red and green and blue. But I hadn't seen purple. I hadn't seen gold. There was also a silver. So we just kind of got samples of all of them and decided like which ones would be good. And DEF CON, now a lot of conferences will have different color badges for the different types of attendees. So this was the first time we tried to do it. The white one was human, and that was like the regular attendee. And then red was goon, which are the helpers that basically have access to everything. So people very quickly realized that they could just paint their white badge red. And now they have like all access. So it really showed like this sort of hacker mentality of like, all right, you give something to people and they're gonna do what they want with it, which was actually pretty exciting. And actually, I think Mickey, didn't you do a DEF CON 14 counterfeit badge? Yeah, so Mickey did a DEF CON 14 counterfeit badge in black, and the black badge is what gets you like entry to DEF CON forever. So at the time, so we also did a badge hacking contest of like, what could you do with the design? Just to see what it would be, and like a handful of people kind of got into it, and it was actually pretty exciting. And later, many years later, like doing counterfeit badges became a thing, and you actually would like get rewarded for doing a counterfeit badge. So yeah, this we had a PIC 10F202 and just some LEDs that were jumbo LEDs that were blinking. Back then, like jumbo LEDs were awesome. I think they had like just come out of like, ooh, we're gonna use are they 10 millimeter? And blue, right? Blue LEDs were coming down in cost. It was like, oh my God. So it just blinked lights. Really, really cool stuff. Ultimately, we got all of the components got in enough time to manufacture. It wasn't as dramatic as later years as far as the lead times of things, but it sort of set that. It like, there's a word, I don't have the word for it, but it set precedence, or like a prescient, is it, or something of like. It almost foresaw the future of like drama with badge manufacturing always. So yeah, everyone ended up getting one and liking it, and that was pretty cool. And it's funny, like I'd see pictures of DEF CON, it's like, wow, we were actually taking pictures at DEF CON, because now it's like you can't take pictures unless you have permission. This we did say we're gonna take a picture, so some people were covering their face, but still, this is pretty rare. Okay, so then DEF CON 15 was like, what can we do next? Like people starting to like it. This is where it got a little bit crazier, but here I'm using 2 capacitive touch sensing buttons to go up and down, and we have our little LED matrix. At the time, the LED belt buckles were really popular, so you could like program your name into the belt buckle. So we wanted to do something like that. Basically, it would scroll. You could set your message that you wanted to scroll on there, and it had a Freescale microcontroller and the capacitive touch sensing buttons. It had a footprint for an accelerometer, and which I thought would be cool if you wanted to do like a marble game or something that I didn't have time to build in. And then I had a whole wireless section, and I think it was a Zigbee. Yeah, it was an 802.15.4 setup for a Freescale part, because Freescale was the one that I was working with at the time, and it was the full design. And I was like, well, if there's somebody hardcore, like we had the parts, they could build it in, they could design some code to do something, but nobody ever did anything with it. So this one was less of a part sourcing issue, because we kind of learned, all right, let's start earlier. And this ended up being more of an RTFM issue, where my first design got it back. There was a couple board fabrication issues that I had as far as the cutouts and things. But I very quickly realized that the capacitive touch sensing buttons, which I was using 2 of the Defcon icons for, the top and the bottom, they weren't like working very well. And I'm like, what is going on? And worked fine on my prototype, right? Which is like the classic thing. And it turns out that I was using a single coin cell to power all the digital circuitry and the capacitive circuitry. And I had some filtering in there, but it just wasn't working right. So I built up, once I solved the problem, had to build up some extra circuitry that you see there. But it turns out, if I had read the data sheet more carefully, it basically is like, power your capacitive touch sensing buttons from a completely separate rail, completely separate regulator. So I had to then add a second battery and then use 2 low dropout linear regulators for those individual capacitive touch sensing buttons, and then it worked. And then everybody liked it, and it was fine. The funny thing, though, what I didn't anticipate is when you're wearing the badge, the capacitive touch sensing system will like recalibrate every once in a while, but if it's like bouncing against your chest, it's gonna cycle all the time. So there were some people that had these crazy messages because it was like just tapping on them all the time. So it's like a user interface thing that you don't anticipate. This one also had a persistence of vision mode, so you can enter it and then you can wave it in the air and it would say Defcon, because I was like really excited about that at the time. So Defcon 16, this was 2008. This is when it started being like, people were expecting a badge, an electronic badge. And doing one every year of thousands of quantity, like it was a lot of work. But it was almost like, all right, what's next? And we would start thinking about it right away. I don't have the time frames in here, but we generally tried to leave at least like 4 to 6 months and try to get parts in way earlier. And as we dealt with it, we'd start earlier and earlier, and I'd basically go to Jeff and be like, dude, we gotta start like the day after DEF CON. Because a lot of times getting a hold of him for months before we figure out what we wanna do, it's like dealing with a customer that doesn't call you back and then they're like, where's your product? But I've learned over time how to deal with that, and we have what's called like it's like a Jeff, what is it, a Jeff denial of service, where we basically, like, you call him, you text him, you email him, and eventually you get to him to approve you to, spend all the money that you need to spend. I should mention, too, that doing this with somebody else's money is always better, to try new techniques and new technologies and everything if you can. But it didn't make it any less stressful. So, yeah, Defcon 16, again, another type of solder mask kind of colors, but this time we tried different silkscreen colors, too, which was like, ooh, let's try that. So there's red. Not super crazy. What I did realize, though, is like the yellow solder mask, you can actually see the board substrate through it, and there's logos in there. So we had to, because we were ordering so many, we requested from the circuit board material fabricator to make substrate without the logos. So we wouldn't see their logos like sprinkled through the thing. So you can do stuff like that if you're convincing enough and if you have enough volume. So this one had an infrared LED on the front in the Ninja's eye, and then it had an infrared receiver, so you could like put wares or text files on your SD card and transfer it to other people. And then it had a built-in TV be gone, so you could like turn off TVs. And this was, again, we're still bringing people into this world of electronics, and like Mitch doing his TV be gone and making that open source, we could take some of that, roll it in. So we're just trying to like almost bring the maker kind of world in, and we had. This one actually had a background debug mode interface, so people can load new code in. And the badge hacking stuff, if you go to my website, each of these badges has an entry, and there's links. I think all the pictures are still on Flickr. But if you go to Flickr, you'll see all the badge hacking stuff that people have done, and it's just amazing, right? So like we start realizing, okay, you build it, people are going to come and do amazing stuff with it. So this one, yeah, just general, there's my development. So this one we planned 3 months for production. So we're like, we're gonna start production so early, nothing's gonna happen. Development went, as well as it could, but the production was the worst. And what ended up happening is, well, there's 3 different things. One vendor who made the SD card socket, which is critical, right? Because that's what people are gonna load in and all their stuff to. They quoted a 6-week lead time. It ended up being 12 weeks. And that was after like hours and hours of phone calls, which now is not surprising, right? It's like, oh, things take forever and you have to anticipate it. But we thought we had so much time. There was an electronics I don't know what they're called, but like they do parts programming. So we basically bought microcontrollers from a vendor, from a distributor. They sent to this other place who would program them, and then they would ship the programmed ones to the factory. There was, it was supposed to be a 5-day turnaround, but there was a couple parts that they said were bad, and we had a 6,000 piece order, and they basically held the order until they could figure out what was wrong with like a dozen of the parts, which threw off the whole schedule. It ended up getting to the factory 10 days before Defcon. In China, Defcon is in the US, right? So that was a little stressful. These notes here are from a hotel room when I was there for Black Hat, right before Defcon, and a friend of mine speaks Chinese, Mandarin, I think, and was talking to the factory and translating because the owner of the factory speaks English, but he wanted to go directly to like the guy on the floor. And we're trying to figure out like how can we get as many parts as many assembled boards as we can by this point? Can you ship every day? We need these things. It was rough. It ended up being, they were shipping some, and we got a balance of boards on Friday when Defcon, I think Defcon was starting on Friday then, I can't remember, but it was like the first day of Defcon, and then the second day of Defcon, and the third day of Defcon. And they were just still coming in, and it was so stressful. So these are the notes of like, can we maybe ship every day? Can you ship small boxes to avoid customs? And then customs was the other thing. This one, now also was not a surprise, but the Olympics were happening at the same time, so they were like extra scrutinizing everything coming in and out of China. One box that had most of our microcontrollers was held for months, and we ended up using those microcontrollers the next year because now we had extra thousands of them. Then we bought more stuff and sent them through again, and customs held them. And then we realized, okay, customs has a thing with the factory, and they had some beef with the factory. So the factory went and tried to pay off the customs people. That didn't work. And then it turns out that the owner of the factory, who lives in Arizona, got components locally, put them in a suitcase, and flew to China and dropped them at the factory. And those ended up getting to the factory 4 days before Defcon. So, yeah, shipping issues are scary. So because of that, we decided to go much simpler. Defcon 17, the next year, we're like, we have the components that finally got released from customs. What can we do? As simple as possible, microphone LED. And even microphone, anybody who's been to Defcon, it's like, just saying the fact that I'm gonna have a microphone on a badge, like that was a discussion of like, what's that? Oh, thank you. Yeah, even though it was listening to you. No, I'm just kidding. But that was the thing of like, right, microphone, even then, like, what was that too? Maybe still BlackBerry. I don't know if everybody had iPhones. Probably there were some iPhones, but the surveillance state wasn't as it is now, but it was enough where I'm like, ooh, a microphone, that's scary. But I'm gonna do it anyway because I wanna keep it simple. So microphone, RGB LED reverse mount, and that's shining through. So basically it's like as you're talking, the light blinks, and it has an FFT on board. It's a digital signal controller, so it has some DSP functionality in it. So we just figured, let's keep it simple, put a little prototyping area on there, and then people can start adding stuff to it. Because at this point, it's been 4 years, or 3 years, whatever it is, what can they do? And it was another situation of people did amazing stuff with it. And Freescale was there now supporting everybody hacking on it. So it was like badges were becoming acceptable and kind of accepted. So some development photos. My favorite, though, is here I'm flying, I think, to Florida for winter break or something. And like there's a little bit of my kids, what are those called? The baby carriers, whatever. And he's now 16, but he's sitting next to me, and then I'm sitting there like doing development on the badge on the plane. So this one, what we tried to do was a little bit different. Before this one, we had individual badges, different shapes, or like the shape was the same for all the badges, just different colors. This year, we wanted to do different shapes for the badges, and they'd all fit together. And the point here, again, was to bring people together, right? Of like, let's see if everybody can, if one of each type of person meets and they connect their badges together, there's badge-to-badge communication over I2C, then it's gonna do something special with the LEDs. So everybody has to kind of socialize, which is funny that like we're encouraging socializing. It's like, that's the last thing I wanna do is like be out with 1 million people connecting badges, but it turns out other people like socializing. So this is, I use Altium Designer. Boo, I know. But that's what I've been using forever. And I usually, is this being recorded? Okay, maybe I won't say. I started with Protel Easy Tracks, no, Free Tracks, and which was very early version. Then that got bought by Altium, and eventually ended up with like the non-free version, and that's what I use now. So this we can see like different solder mask layers for the different colors, a lot of artwork on there, and then we split apart the different badges, and then this is what it ended up looking like in real life. We're also using, this is the first time I'd use a thinner substrate. So it was, I think, 31 mil instead of 62 mil. But look at those solder mask colors. Like, they're so bright, right? It's different. I can't remember if we used a white solder mask and then we put color on top. And then we had the gray silk screen, because the silk screen has a little lower resolution than solder mask. So we did the gray graphics as silk screen and then solder mask for the rest. But it came out super awesome. And that was like, wow. So this one, same situation of like, we started even way earlier, but this is what happened, of you just can never anticipate. And in this case, we were trying to buy local parts. Like, I always like to buy my parts myself and then ship them to wherever the factory is, just because I don't trust, especially with counterfeit parts and supply chain thing. Like, you never know what parts are being used. So I would like to think if I'm buying them from a local distributor, the quality is good, which is not always true. We know they're, FTDI gate and all of that stuff. But in general, we expect the parts we're buying are good. Instead of like somebody going to a market, we don't know where those parts came from. So I was shipping parts to the factory, and this was in May. Defcon wasn't until August. It was like plenty of time, right? No problem. And then there was this, and it turns out it took 2 months to get released from customs. And in this case, I think they were paid off in some way, and yeah, this was the worst. No, I guess this wasn't even the worst, because the time before it was like 4 months. Anyway, so we kind of see this theme, right, of like dealing with parts, and now it's probably worse. We have all the tariff things to worry about and all of that. Have you done the panel yet with tariffs? Does that come out tomorrow? Okay, so panel about manufacturing problems. But what we wanted to do for, is this one for, oh, that was Defcon 17. Okay. So then, God, I want to talk about all of these first. There's so many cool things that happened with all of these. So Defcon 18, we're like, what can we do that's different? By this point, this is my 5th year. I'm like, oh my God, I'm kind of sick of doing this. The stress, it's a lot. And the fact that people are expecting it made me sort of like, yeah, like, I don't know, maybe this is going to be my last one. Like, if someone's going to want something from me, I tend to not do it. And this was just like, okay, what can we do? So we decided to use an aluminum substrate, and then say, like, instead of using like solder mask, could we laser etch or laser engrave the substrate on a single side and then have circuitry on the backside? So this was another like wild thing. We had no idea. The boards had to be fabricated, and then they had to be sent to a laser etching place, and then they had to come back, and then they had to be electrically tested and then manufactured. So it sort of like left the safe facility and went somewhere else, and the manufacturer was a little bit worried about that. But here's like the artist. I worked with the Defcon artist. I never tried to do my own art because it would look really bad. So here he did some pencil sketches. Then it went to like an ink drawing. And then these are the 7 different badges, not populated yet, which you couldn't see from the other side anyway. But there's like full laser engraved artwork on there for each of the different 7 badges, which looks super cool. So the concept of this one was there's different glyphs that you could have. This was a 0 power LED. So like, I think it was pre-Kindle, but it was around that time of like, you could put something on a display and it's gonna stay there even when you remove power. And all of my badges try to be a single coin cell, CR2032, except for Defcon 15 where I had to add the extra one. So this was cool. I think it was called like a 0 power, not Polaris stick, something or other. And it was super fun to kind of do this, but basically you have different glyphs, and you can put on the screen like the different icons of things that you like. And there was a whole bunch of different ones of like lockpicking and drinking and electronics and network and all little tiny icons. And the point is like, you then walk up to somebody and be like, oh, we share the same, oh, you like soldering too? Let's go, let's talk. And then people did crazy hacks with it. At this point, we realized that because the badge was starting to be accepted, we're like, all right, instead of just making it its own kind of thing in its own silo, like let's reach out to other groups within Defcon and see like how do they want to integrate it. So we put all sorts of hidden functionality in here for like the capture the flag contest. Lost, Ryan Clark, who ended up taking over the badges for a while, was really into like puzzles, so he put some puzzles in there. We had some other hidden messages, and there was a Ninja Networks party. Those guys started doing like pretty cool badges, and you'd basically get a card from them that had a series of like lock tumblers, and on the screen you would choose once you get to the secret mode, you choose the lock tumblers, and then you plug that into their machine at the party, and that gives you access to the party. So it was fun to sort of expand the badges into more of the community, which is pretty cool. And here's what it ended up looking like of the one. We had different solder mask colors on the backside, but that was pretty cool. All right, I'm already over, but I'm almost done. Remember when Osh Park first started doing flex circuit boards? Who has ordered one from Osh Park? Like, that's a lot of people. Yeah, as soon as they offered it, I was like, I want to do something with flex. I'd never done flex. Why not? I should mention, okay, so Defcon 18, 5 years, I retired. I stopped doing it. I'm like, I kind of proved my point. People liked badges. It's becoming its own monster. I don't need to keep doing it. I'm satisfied with like myself. Other people took it, rolled with it. It was wild. So many years pass. Osh Park does flex, and then I made these glasses, which I called the flexible spectacles, which are open source. They're on my website. And just wanted to do something with it, but I didn't really have a project. So I'm like, I'm gonna make those. And then I was talking to the Dark Tangent, and he's like, hey, so other people have manufactured the badges over the past couple years. Now we're getting towards Defcon 27, so 9 years since I did it. He's like, first of all, we're having a Defcon China, which we had a beta version last year. Now we're having an actual Defcon China official thing. Do you want to design the badge? And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, that was really stressful. But it's been a while. I feel like I wanted to like do something. And then I'm like, oh, I could do something with Flex. And then we started talking, and pretty much within like 10 minutes, we're like, let's have a tree that you can walk around different areas of Defcon. And as you complete different tasks, things that you maybe wouldn't normally do, like you get a flag, and that, like, that's your thing, right? And if you complete all of your flags, then the tree does all sorts of stuff. And then there was even a room you could go to and plug your badge in, and I'll show you what that looks like. So it was a very communal thing of trying to get people to, instead of socialize, of try things they wouldn't try, but then you plug it into a communal tree that is growing. Really, really cool. I didn't do that side of things. We worked with a local artist to do that. So yeah, we had some ideas, and it was like, all right, let's try Flex as a real thing, not just as glasses. And really, flex circuits are just rigid circuits with a flexible substrate, or a much thinner substrate. But there's all sorts of other things to deal with as far as like manufacturing tolerance, especially in our case, because we had a connector that we wanted to plug into things, so like a flat flex connector. So we ended up getting prototypes. This was something we didn't have a huge amount of time for. And this one we also only did 3,300 compared to like the other thousands. So we ended up got some sketches, ended up doing a prototype first of the Flex, just to see if it worked, make sure the connector worked and everything. This one was an Arduino-based design because the Chinese hacking community, at least who was at Defcon, because it was the first one, we're like, let's give them a resource that's a little easier than like just a general purpose microcontroller with some development tools. So this was Arduino based, which I'd never actually done an Arduino project besides using like the module. So I thought this would be fun. Has USB, all sorts of other functionality, but basically like the lights of the tree would light up, and then when you complete it, does other stuff. I ran into two problems with Flex, and this was like, oh no. The first one is the way that I had the first design, the USB connector on the side, like, would bend over time because I had a copper pore around the Flex to give it more stability, but not on the USB part. So you can see it sort of bent right at that section. So to fix that, I basically just made the outline of the board bigger so the connector was on the board, not dangling off. But then I had a transistor footprint flipped, which is like, everybody knows, like, check your footprints. I don't exactly know what happened, but it was flipped. And normally, if you have a rigid board, you're like, all right, you just take it, you cut some traces, you rewire it. When you're doing that with Flex, it's a much harder thing because now you're cutting through the substrate, and I had a copper pour, I had a copper pour on the other side. So as I'm cutting through the trace, I'm cutting into the copper pour, and I'm short-circuiting things, and it was a huge nightmare to get the wiring to the point where I could at least test it. So I would say if you are working with Flex, like do a rigid version first. Except if I'd done a rigid version first and not a Flex version, I wouldn't have found the first problem, right? So you almost need like multiple versions. This is what it ended up looking like. And with Flex also, there's what's called a cover lay. So instead of on a rigid board where you have solder mask and then you have your silkscreen, this is a cover lay, so it's almost like some sort of like plasticky material that goes on top, and I think it's laminated down, and then there's silkscreen on top, so different silkscreen colors on top of that. And then trying to do a cool shape also. So this one was fun. And then here's like, and it bends. This was a video that somebody made, but he's like showing it off. And yeah, because all the circuitry is right in the middle. You could, if you bent it enough, you would pop off the parts. But it was super fun. Like this was one of my favorite. I mean, they're all my favorite in different ways, but this one to have pulled it off and have it like this paper thin board is super rad. And if you haven't done Flex, I would recommend doing it just because it's fun. And then here's the Tree of Promise. That was the shipping container with just all the artwork in it. And as you plug in your badge, your particular badge ID, like part of your leaf gets bigger, and like the tree gets bigger as more people plug into it. It was really cool. What we learned from this is that people like community. And we kind of knew this already, but it's like having this this goal that people work towards together was like surprising, because it worked really well here. We're like, let's do something similar for Defcon 27. Oh, by the way, okay, so Jeff and I figured like Defcon China, super fun. I'd never been to China, like free trip to China, why not? And then as soon as I said yes to that, he's like, so do you want to do Defcon 27 also? And he's a really hard guy to say no to. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? That one was way harder to figure out what we're going to do, and it ended up being a couple months after Defcon China. So we were doing 2 badge designs in parallel. Absolute nightmare. The theme of Defcon 27 was this was the original inspiration. I think this was from some old vintage computer advertisement, maybe Apple, I'm not sure. But the colors, everything was just happy and light and mystical and fun, as opposed to like a lot of the dark themes of DEF CON and cyber or cyberpunk-ish sort of things. So this was a much happier occasion, DEFCON 27, more colorful. So I saw this, and my mind immediately went to like crystals and gemstones and all of these things. And I'm like, how can I work in a crystal into this board? Because at this point, it's been many, many years of doing badges, lots of different solder mask colors, artwork. Like I feel like that's been done. So what can I do as this sort of comeback for the year? So here's like, I'm just kind of testing with different crystals. What we also wanted to do is something a little different because badge life now was huge. Everybody was making badges, so why should we take up the lanyard when let's move up the stack? Like let's move our badge up on the lanyard like a kind of bolo so everybody else can hang their stuff from the regular badge. So you see here, badge and badge life. And this, I think I don't, I'm not sure if I show it. Anyway, this is what the badge looked like. And we had a bunch of circuitry on the back side, and the front side, basically, we had hand-cut quartz crystals and dyed for the different colors. I think I have a picture of it. But it looked really cool. And then here we had these huge bus bars that you could slide your lanyard through, and then that gives space on the bottom side. What we didn't anticipate is that's not an intuitive thing. Most people just clip their lanyard right onto the badge. So I was like, oh my God, I was standing at registration and seeing people get the badge, clipping it. And I'm like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, put it through the thing. And that was another reminder of like, if you're designing something, you can't necessarily anticipate what a user is going to do versus what you want them to do. And after like trying to help 20 people, I'm like, forget it. Eventually, it sort of percolated through the crowd and like through DEF CON. But what ended up happening is when people were clipping on with their lanyard, the metal of the lanyard was hitting the small antenna that was there and like knocking off the antenna. And at this point, DEFCON 27, now there's almost 30,000 people. Not everybody, I would say, is a hacker. Not everybody is self-sufficient enough to know what to do. So people were complaining that they were knocking off the antenna, and my response, if they found me, was like, go to the soldering village or the hacking village and fix it, to try to empower them. But it was an interesting transition based on the earlier days where it was much more DIY, I guess I would say. But this one was very ambitious. Besides the crystal element, we had near-field magnetic induction. Basically, you could communicate with other people, not NFC, but kind of like an air core transformer, and you're sending data between them. I think they're used for hearing aids. And microcontroller, LED driver, basically some stuff from NXP, because I was still in a relationship with them. And really, when I choose parts, by the way, it all comes down to like what vendor is going to take me out to dinner and like wine and dine me the most. And so it was Freescale it was Microchip, and then it was Freescale, and then it was NXP. And I would say that to vendors, right? Because I've had vendors that are like, we don't want to work with you. And the ones that are willing to and appreciate the community and are willing to give discounts and give good support, like, we did it. And by this point, NXP knew. Like, Defcon is huge. This is great kind of marketing. And we ended up using this device, this NFMI device, that we found some bugs in it. Like, there was stuff that we were doing that they hadn't anticipated. But it basically was a game where, kind of like Defcon China, you'd go to different places and you'd get a flag. If you communicated with different people of the different types of attendees, you would get a flag. And the goal ultimately was to like talk to everybody of the different types, and it would, all at the same time, by the way. So this one we were doing really tiny features on the board. So we're using X-ray now to inspect stuff. We have VIA in pad, which I'd never done before. It turns out we were doing X-ray on the prototypes, and it turns out the circuit board fabricator changed the design on us and didn't tell us. So make sure if you are outsourcing stuff between prototype and production, they changed some of the VIAs to increase yield and didn't tell us, which I thought was kind of messed up. But then it reminded me of like, oh, that's what happens. And sometimes factories will do that for other reasons. So we did some X-rays on it, and I even added a little hidden logo in there. So if somebody X-rayed the board, which I doubt anybody did, except maybe John McMaster. So yeah, this one actually, so all the other badges were done offshore at eTechNet, except for Defcon China was done in the US which is kind of, now that I think about it, like, that's kind of interesting. And that was because the people that were doing it had a lot of experience with flex circuits, so they were helping me all the time. And then this one was done in Portland, well, in Hillsborough, by Fusion EMS. And that one, because it was so complicated, I could go in person and talk to them, and it was amazing. This sort of sums it up, of all of the kind of badge life, of everybody kind of holding their badges together and communicating, and that was like a very special moment to sort of end things. And then, if you care, we went from starting at 6,000, basically going up with Defcon up to 28,000, and it got very, very expensive. I don't have pictures of like sourcing the gemstones and everything, but I went to China. It was amazing to deal with that. So I have a couple pictures at the end that just to show you like this isn't tied just to badge manufacturing. After this, I sort of did some other projects of like, what can I do cool badge stuff with? Badge techniques for non-badge things. So hopefully that's what you take out of it, because I don't think there's enough badge conferences for everybody to do badges. But this was a drawing that one of my kids made, and then we turned it into like a thing that actually eats paper, but the same design, custom cutouts, and then you're like, well, how does it do that? There's a paper shredder on the back. Pizza compass. So this was black matte solder mask, and then using the features of immersion gold in copper. So these are things that a lot of people are doing now, but I thought they were sort of fun. And then my favorite project is the World's Thinnest Boombox. 7 solder mask colors, and I didn't do the artwork again, but capacitive touch. So taking all of the elements of stuff I'd learned over the years to make this super thin boombox. I used VIA in pad along the entire thing, so you can't see any traces on it. These cost about $6,000 each to make. If you want to watch, there is a video about this. There's a video about the pizza compass, but a fun way to sort of experiment with techniques that you might not normally use, but now you know it's possible, right? So you can do it, and that's my life of badges. So thank you.